we have a huge amount of AI right now that figures out what you should do and how you should do it, a lot less on taking action with that information.
What an episode today. Folks are really going to enjoy this one. Rick is something else. What do you think, Jennifer?
Oh my goodness, so much experience to draw on. It's just a phenomenal. I think one of the things that I enjoyed the most about this conversation with Rick comes with this, because of the experience and the knowledge that he's built, this natural just exuberance and excitement, this enthusiasm for what AI can do, but yet he's such a systems thinker that he really focuses so much on making the financial case for ROI and measurable ROI on the AI systems. It's a great balance.
Yeah, I think few people can accumulate this level of knowledge and then also stay practical and then also stay excited, as you said.
Yeah.
Those three things really come together in Rick. They make him just a really special person. And at one point in the episode, folks are going to hear how he actually took the time to think through every part of an organization and get to like 4.5 million use cases. Maybe we touched like 30 of them or something like that. I had this thought of like, if you were limited to only have your generative AI get trained on one person, it might be Rick.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So folks are going to enjoy this one. We should, let's jump into it. What do you think?
Let's do it. We're excited to welcome Rick Sturgeon to the show, an accomplished technology and engineering executive with more than 30 years of experience leading digital transformation across the automotive, industrial, and electronics sectors. Rick has held senior leadership roles at Dassault Systèmes, at Infosys, Johnson Controls, and General Motors. And he now serves as Executive Director and Generative AI Consultant at C-Logix Corp., where he advises manufacturers in implementing AI-powered solutions for real-world impact. He is widely recognized for his work advancing digital twin technology and model-based systems engineering in global manufacturing environments. In this episode, we explore how global automotive and industrial manufacturers are modernizing their engineering and production systems to meet the demands of a rapidly changing industry. From navigating workforce shortages to accelerating EV timelines, Rick shares practical insights on how companies are integrating AI into real-world workflows and scaling digital transformation beyond the pilot phase. We'll discuss what separates organizations that truly transform from those that stall, and what it takes to empower engineering and IT teams to lead through change. Rick, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's a lot to live up to. We'll take a shot at it, though.
Yeah.
You've got an amazing background, Rick. So, I mean, that's where I want to start. I want you to dissect that a bit for us. I'll throw out a couple highlights again. It was like Cummins, General Motors, Johnson Controls. And I guess when you were leading, that was before the Adient spin out. So it was Automotive and it was building controls and automation. And then as Jennifer just described, like you've done that leadership in manufacturing and you've led via Infosys Dassault, the systems and technology companies. So I guess walk us through your journey from, the first plant level system that you advised to like guiding overall transformations, and what's that looked like and what have you learned along the way?
Sure. Well, thank you. It's hard to go over your long career. You feel really old, but I feel young actually. So let's take a shot. I started out in automotive at a company called Allied Signal. Actually, it's now Honeywell.
Mm.
And for about 10 years, I was doing plant automation and, robots and early computer systems. And I was probably one of the early people that got heavily into automating plants with computer systems.
Nice.
And that sort of got me on this journey to move from manufacturing engineering into IT. And I ended up pretty quickly being what they call a CIO, and at first at a big electronics company. And then when you're a CIO, you either do really well and you get a promotion, or you do really bad and you get fired. It's every 18 months. So I went on that journey, more getting hired than fired, but need the experience of both.
Yeah, there you go.
And so I ended up being the first CIO of the Cummins engine company, which was quite an experience for me. I was young and I was dealing with the boards of directors of a big company and automating many things. we put in Oracle applications across the company and all kinds of automations in the various plants. And from there, I went into consulting at KPMG and
Mm-hmm.
then sort of ultimately moved to General Motors, where I ran actually uh, all the IT, operations, infrastructure, security, and two of the six CIOs. And at that point, they told me all of this is broken and we want you to run it while you fix it. It was a very interesting experience at the time, the largest
Fly the plane while you're
manufacturing company
fixing it.
in the
Yeah.
world. Yeah. But, I learned about big companies at that point, and I pretty much was not, I was not home at all. I had young kids. So
Oh,
uh, I got an opportunity to go to Johnson Controls, which was not quite yet, but a very large auto supplier. And I had IT initially and then ultimately engineering operations, which was most of engineering. And I did that for quite a long time. And I really used the strategies of globalization at General Motors to apply it to Johnson Controls, which 12 big centers and manufacturing all over the world. And we became the largest automotive supplier. To give you a scale, one third of the auto seats in the world, a quarter of the complete interiors, including electronics.
hmm.
And in my role, I got to deal with everything that went wrong. So, I got a lot of experience and certainly down through manufacturing very
That
heavily.
was one third of the seats for all global automotive were coming
Yeah,
through Johnson Controls
yeah.
then. Wow, that's significant.
But it amounted to, if, the manufacturing people that are on the phone can appreciate it, it would be about 450 launches a year,
Wow.
and I think it was, many hundreds of plants. And so, heavy interaction with how we use software to make things better. And in the end, I was paying for all the software, but I also knew about it. I tried to get rid of the software as quick as possible, but be able to yell at somebody else rather than myself. But and then when Johnson Controls actually broke up into about three or four different companies, I left and went to a company called Dassault Systèmes, which is the largest product development software company. Actually, two men in black suits came to see me the day I retired, and they made an offer I couldn't refuse from Dassault. And I was the senior director of the North American auto industry, although very involved globally for, I think, over 7 years. And it was a great experience to really get to see. I mean, we had like 500,000 customers, but a lot of big ones,
Right,
and
right.
got to see what everybody's doing. When I
That was
left,
great.
so I started actually helping companies like you try to find their way into automotive. So that's what I'm doing today, and a lot
Excellent.
of involvement in the industry itself.
No, yeah, it's been fantastic to get to know you, Rick, and work together. That career is pretty epic, and it's still going. So,
Yeah, I mean, there's so much there to unpack. I'm trying to figure out which one to jump in first. I mean, there's a lot of it. You kind of talk through the evolution. I want to maybe stop in there for a minute. So, evolution of automotive engineering. We're talking about CAD, PLM, digital twins, model based systems. You have a rich background in all of it, right? I always like to ask this question of our guests. Looking back, what turning points stand out as, truly like an inflection point? Just like what are in reshaping the way that cars have been designed and built over the if you have to look back over your career, what stands out?
Well, during college, I was on a drafting board,
mm,
so obviously the
Mhm.
concept of computer-aided design, I was very involved in it from the beginning, really.
Yeah.
And, that added some efficiency, I suspect, although not initially. But when you think about turning points in a career, I think certainly the advent of moving from, and this will sound really old, but pneumatic controls to digital controls. I have
oh,
a degrees in electrical, and I got one in chemical engineering because I was actually, even before the automotive, I was at a consulting firm, and uh, we were doing big DuPont and PPG and plants and so forth, and people couldn't really keep track of the chemical engineers always did the controls, and the electrical, of course, do what electricals do, and they couldn't talk to each other, different languages.
Yep.
So I actually was playing on the club ice hockey team at Ohio State. I still play hockey 3 times a week. And so I, had to keep a course. So I started taking Chem E courses, and it turned into a degree. And ultimately, it was a very big inflection for me because I could speak both languages. And, of course, they learned them quick enough, and that moved on. And then certainly in automotive, the concept of MRP systems, rather than big planning boards, I was very involved in that. Actually, I helped as the main customer develop what's called Oracle ERP. And, I knew Ellison and all of those guys. Once they get really important, though, they forget you.
Famous guy now, yeah.
You probably will too, Andrew. You'll remember me, but pretty quick. I'll call Andrew. Well, I'm, see my son. Well, hopefully that'll happen for you. So, in any case, but then,
Pneumatic controls don't sound that old to me. I was, I think not that long ago, more than a decade, but in my PhD putting, little hoses up to each, connecting a relay to pneumatic controls on the equipment I built. So
I don't know how to use those very well, so you're ahead of me. But just, sort of moving on, the Cummins experience was, for me, more of a learning how big companies work at strategy right at the top. I reported to the president, and ultimately he became CEO, and one of the CEOs of the year, Tim Solso. Actually, yeah, I like to digress, but when I was
go
a
for
little
it.
later going to GM, he said, "No, it's a terrible company. You shouldn't go there."
Yeah.
Him, I really need a job, and it's a good job. And he said, "Okay, I'll write your, review." And so, I got the job. And then when GM went into bankruptcy, he ended up actually being on the board and ultimately being the CEO of GM. So I thought it was an interesting turnaround. But in any case, that was a great experience, and hopefully that gives a sense of the level of it. But then I actually was very involved, and this is a turning point for everything, really, for the
Okay.
concept of e-commerce.
Mm.
And, we talk about these little transitions, but I worked heavily just for a couple of years at KPMG between Cummins. Remember, with IT jobs, you always, have these little 18 2-year type of centers. And that was really, and it sort of ties to what we're going to talk about in you. I had a global practice at KPMG for e-commerce and for industrial companies. And of course, all the Microsofts and whatever were doing what they're doing. But I would have a strategy group too, and we would do it for generally the CEO or somebody that really thought that was good. And we would figure out their strategy in meetings, and then we would show it to them and they'd all vote on it. But in every case, the most important guy in the room that wasn't for it said, "What a waste of time. Don't you know people will never buy things on the internet?"
Mm.
And I was a young guy, I thought, well, these are really important people. Maybe they're right, but they really weren't right.
Mm.
Well, in this, we sort of missed why I went to Infosys, which
Mm.
I didn't cover.
Mm.
It's because I saw the next trend about to happen, and that was called generative AI.
Mm.
And, I've always been on the head of things, and I realized this is bigger than anything I've been involved with. And I would say, from a progression perspective, we're about at the same place that we are when that guy told me people will never buy things. Maybe they believe more of that but in a very, very early stage.
Yeah.
And at Infosys, I worked across, I don't know, 70 customers, a lot of custom AI. Infosys was one of the first 5 investors in OpenAI and had a lot of capability.
Mm.
And we up in product development, we certainly did some, but most of it was down in manufacturing, automated weld inspection, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway,
Interesting.
too much.
I think we are at that stage. Yeah, it was interesting. You talked about controls revolution, and then people still spend a lot of time thinking about PLCs and SCADA and controls these days. Usually not pneumatic, but ladder-based PLCs. You talk about MRP, big wave of software. You talk about the e-commerce and the web shift and how parallel that is to generative AI. I think that's so true. It is definitely the early inning. And people are saying we're in a bubble. We probably are in a bubble. And at the same time, like the web, it's like it's not even close to popping. That's my personal prediction. Could be wrong. Someone can, look at this. But in any case, like we know, bubble pop, keep going. There's something just massive coming. And I think it comes in the form, I don't know if you'll agree or disagree, Rick, that people say, okay, maybe it'll co-pilot or just help me a bit, but this wouldn't do this job, right? And then we kind of know it's true that like generative AI is going to massively change the work landscape, and there's going to be all kinds of new jobs, but we can't quite picture all what the new jobs are yet, and so it's hard to like jump our heads into that future. And I guess I wanted to bring up in that context this question of talent in manufacturing, because for me that's this unique place that we're in history of this like turning point in talent where it's been going on for a while, but it's now reached this like fever pitch that we don't have the necessary talent. Everybody's talking about this everywhere, right?
Mhm.
Like there's going to be 2.8 million retiring here. There's going to be 30 million or 60 million worldwide over 5 years or 10 years, that sort of thing. And we all know it to be true. And we generally believe that these technologies like generative AI and digital twin are going to play a big role. But people can't quite put the pieces together. They're not sure on what timeline. So like talk about this for a bit. Like what's your view? Do you think these tools can realistically extend the reach of limited expertise? Can they enable teams to move faster? Can this really be done with the precision and quality that's needed in places like automotive manufacturing?
Well, I think it's an opportunity to actually address the issue. Companies for some years, 10 years at least, have been talking about how the older, knowledgeable, and aerospace especially, the older employees have been retired and the younger ones are not coming along as much. We offshored so much that we sort of killed off how we train young employees in many parts of the companies. Although, offshoring has its value, but one of the negatives is that you don't
Sure.
have these lifelong employees that know where every bolt goes and why. And, personally use generative AI, as you and I have talked about, very heavily for my small company does games, and I got very involved in it recently using generative AI.
Yeah.
And what I learned from that, and even at Infosys, I saw it a bit as well, it really takes generative AI is a tool. It's just a new kind of a tool, like an ERP system was a new kind of a tool. And there's a learning for everybody on how to use it. We're familiar with chat, but your company, Arch Systems, the reason that I'm engaging here with you is I thought it was one of the very leading early companies to actually figure out how to actually provide productivity with knowledge
Mm.
without necessarily requiring a PhD in AI to use it. And I suspect, well, one of the reasons I slowed down at Infosys, and left really, is early on we were doing huge custom AI things. There's a bunch of companies that do those. Collect all the data in your plant, ship it up to the cloud, and it'll chug away.
Mm.
But in those cases, it's really not actuating anything. It's just, well, we did it for one company where the president of with North America in this case and Europe said, I just want to know everything that's going on in my plants. And he did. I mean, things that he would have never known. But it still gets into the issue of what's he going to do? Call down there and say, you guys are really screwing up. All the
Yeah.
machines are down, whatever.
Still pick up the
That
phone.
concept of closing the loop
Yeah.
is the step where the productivity will come. And doing the huge systems, people started asking me a question I couldn't answer. Like, well, I could answer it, but I didn't want to. It was, Rick, why should we give you $1 million or 500,000 or $2 million to do this custom thing when we can just wait on our legacy vendors
Mm.
and they will provide that over a period. And that transition, it's not all out there yet. And I was working with several of them very tightly. They're just in the early stages of getting it. But then what I call the smaller startups, like you, they were also coming in. Welding inspection was an example where we had some really great capability we'd done in aerospace and we were putting it into automotive. Well, then the camera people said, we've integrated this into the cameras for like a fraction of the cost that could we do. So my view of this progression is going to happen. It's going to be much bigger than e-commerce ever was because e-commerce was just looking at the sell side really, and this is everything.
Mm.
Uh, I actually did a study, you might say, because I had access to some of the NVIDIA processors in my last company.
Mm.
And it was a simple, and this is something for all of you that are listening to keep in mind. It was eye-opening to me, actually. I said, well, what are the 6 processes that create an automobile?
Mm.
And how will AI help each one of them and how much will it save? I think it was 4.5 million things. And if you can think about that, many of them in manufacturing, not
Wow.
just, how does the HR system work? And what the revelation was to me was this is going to change everything. And it's not just going to change everything, it's going to change exactly how we do the process. Because when you significantly affect everything, you have to step back and say, the way we do it today, the way it's all built on when Henry Ford sat in the room and said, make these drawings and machine this tool and put these things together, what we've done over the last, I don't even, many hundred years probably, is we've just automated that process with CAD, with robots, etc. But will the whole process be adjusted? Now, the first step will be certainly to take the things that can really matter. In Arch Systems, for example, what I liked about it, it actually goes and figures out what's going on the shop floor and using the knowledge of those experts immediately dispatches so that you can get productivity increase. And I know this in my Dassault days. We, for example, have have engineering system or factory floor systems, some of the best in the world. We run GM Powertrain and all kinds of companies. I was very involved in that. And, the concept of what did somebody tell me from the company? We have a huge amount of AI right now that figures out what you should do and how you should do it, a lot less on taking action with that information.
Yeah.
And again, and I'm a commercial. I apologize, but I'm involved. By the way, I don't work for Arch Systems. I don't know what you call somebody that says, "Ray, go win." Um,
Yeah, you're an advisor to us, and we really
yeah,
appreciate it.
yeah, yeah. Well, and the reason I am is I have a lot of energy for actually getting business productivity early on from generative AI. Because what I did before actually was a lot of pilots in my previous job,
Yeah.
but not to the heart of, and, I do a lot of, you know, consulting right now for companies. They ask me things for actually the guys from Wall Street. And they asked me the other day, how can you measure how well generative AI is going in a company, the metric? And I can think of a lot of them. And I said, well, different than anything we've done before, you should measure it in straight business productivity and financial gain.
Yep.
Because this is one of the few things that you can do that with. When we
Yeah.
put in
Absolutely.
other systems, you can measure metrics, but it's really hard to sort it out. But in this one, it probably has 30% overall productivity increase over time. Anyway,
Yeah.
probably
I'll
should.
just jump in there a bit. Yeah, that last thing you said is one of the crazy things about this revolution, that you don't just measure seats or logins or dashboard views or or transactions. It's like you can really measure productivity because it does that kind of work. And I just wanted to throw a praise your way. Like, I don't know anyone that I've heard say that they like tried to take the entire picture of an enterprise. What could be the use cases of generative AI? Go 6 levels deep. I think you mentioned 4.5 million things or something. So
I got in a lot of trouble for the amount of time it
that
burned
is
up.
extremely
Uh,
impressive, though. I think that system level of thinking of like dissecting an entire company, and then you mentioned a ton of those were manufacturing at the process line, but there was HR and everything like that. I mean, yeah, that's why we're glad to have you as an advisor. I know others are too, because most people just don't attempt to take on that level of understanding today. So that was super cool.
And it kind of begs the next question for me. So you're talking about, you think about that level of granularity that needs to be considered when we're architecting these things. And you think about, and go back what you said a minute ago to the rate at which this is unfolding, the rate that the technology is coming. Then put that up against the rate at which we're struggling with skills gap, and the fact that many of our customers are saying, yeah, we have to do 10% more productivity every year with less people than we had this year or last year. I mean, the technology is great; it's unfolding very quickly. But it's also coming at a time where they're really, really struggling, and things are moving very, very quickly internally, right? So when I think about the amount of pressure that they're under to innovate right now, especially when we look at EV platforms, managing the costs and that complexity that you were talking about, let's drop into that for just a minute. In this environment, and I know this is something you've actually talked a lot about, simulation, digital twins, how essential those are. But of course, they're only as good as when it really, reflects the realities that are on the factory floor. So let's talk about that a minute. Why do you think that the access to the real factory data is so critical to making these simulations effective, and the what if scenarios actually useful?
Well, so when you put in a PLM system or a CAD system or whatever kind of system, the hardest problem you have, and not if you're a startup, they have an advantage, but you have to move your legacy data from the other systems into the new system. It's really hard to do. Now you take generative AI, where I think most companies in their factory and engineering, sort of it's all connected, have about 2,000 independent systems. That's a number that I actually know is correct, or relatively correct.
Yeah.
And when you talk about going with a new PLM system or a new MRP system or whatever, you're talking about, a good lot of data, but just one of those systems. And the real power ultimately, and what do people do? We talk about what is knowledge, manufacturing knowledge, whatever. There is some knowledge certainly of how to use a CAD system and how to use a PLM system, but that's not what the knowledge is. The knowledge is the person that's using that system, knowing everything else that's going on from all those other systems, and structuring that knowledge into something that, can do this particular job.
Yeah, workflow.
Well, yeah. So generative AI actually is the first tool that actually can look at all of that information, and if not, and I know a lot of people are talking about, I can't say it right, angelic or automatic AI. And there's some places where that's the case. My own experience with it in its current state is certainly for things that matter, somebody's got to look at it. It can prepare it, but somebody's got to, I've spent 18 hours straight arguing around coding with AI, and I use Musk's stuff now. It's the best for that, at least today.
Yeah.
And in the end, I say that's the worst day of my life. But I did 2 to 3 months of work, if I'd had to do it in another way. Well, people that use the AI need those skills to use it. But secondly, the data has to be all captured. And again, I go back to Arch Systems. One of the things that attracted me at my past job, Infosys, we had a thing called Smart Factory, a lot of AI in it. And it was to capture all that data. And, we did it, we're doing it for a lot of people, extremely expensive, extremely difficult. I believe that you have this unique ability to connect to the old systems through the monitors and capture the information.
We do.
That's the value in that is you probably couldn't even connect to many of them, but something that might cost you millions and millions and millions of dollars and maybe not even ever get right. Now there's a solution to it. And I suspect there'll be many more like that. But ultimately, generative AI is fundamentally different. You buy a system that can support it, but then you have to find your data, whether it be in that system, but more importantly, extra data that's in other systems or outside, and build that into models that in turn can start to, I don't know if it becomes a smart human, but take the expertise of people. Now I'm going to keep going. I've been involved in a lot of big generative AI projects, probably as much as anybody, because I was with one of the main companies that we were Infosys's largest partner, Amazon's largest partner. We agreed with NVIDIA to train, I don't know, 50,000 people. So, I was not driving that, but I was part of it and bringing it to market. And what we found was after you've done all this good work, you still have to bring the experts together and see what the result is, and then have the experts tell it, no, that's not right, and tune it over time.
Yeah.
And you have to keep back and tune it. So it's just a whole different world, and it's really exciting, and we've hardly started.
I wanted to highlight something from what you said. I think you said it so well when you're talking about CAD and PLM systems. It's like there is some knowledge on like how do I use this CAD system? Maybe it's in the manual or the training docs or whatever, but that's not really the knowledge. You said it as well. It's like the person that's going to use that CAD PLM system along with others to get some work done.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of threw out the word, workflow really quick because you were going through that. But like for me, that is something that is so crystal clear, and you said it so well, but I think other people don't get it yet. They haven't grokked that, right? Which is like whenever we're describing a generative AI opportunity, I always ask people to write the human workflow that's happening today before and after. And Jennifer's team does this so well too. They depict these before and afters. And it's like right now, somebody's going into the PLM tool and then they're thinking about this. And then they're going and they're looking at this dashboard. And then they're having this conversation. And then they input this into system Y. And then you go, okay, now what would that look like with generative AI, right? And one of ours, for example, is like people are trying to figure out why the manufacturing line is down. And they're going and they're looking at this dashboard and they're reading this report. And they're mentioning to this person, and then they try to label it. And so now you go with generative AI. The generative AI reads that dashboard and reads this report and lets the person just speak into it what they're seeing or what they take a picture. And then generative AI figures it out and submits the report. And then you're like, oh, and then what was the tacit knowledge? It was like, it was a little bit of that workflow, and it was the how to use these set of systems together, right? And that's just what's so transformational that I think people haven't quite grokked yet. So I guess building on that, it's like, why don't people get it? That's a cultural question, right? And some organizations are, I think you mentioned it directly earlier, Rick, too. You said a lot of organizations say, why don't I just wait for my incumbent big software systems to add this, right?
Right.
And one of the reasons that's such a bad strategy today is that what's magical about this generative AI is the way you use different systems. It's these workflows. It's the tacit knowledge that exists between them. And that knowledge isn't digitized necessarily inside your ERP, or in your PLM or something like that. So I guess talk about culture for a bit here. Like when it actually comes to succeeding at modernizing these complex engineering environments, and especially as you're now looking forward with generative AI, what are the biggest success factors? And where do you think companies get stuck? Like what separates the companies that are transforming or you believe are going to make it through this transformation versus the ones that you think might stall out?
Well, so when you deal with, from the services side, I experienced this. Quite often you'll get together and find an opportunity, generally a point opportunity today versus broader process, where it could make a big difference. And because I think, Jennifer, you mentioned it, companies are so busy, they'll either assign nobody to it or somebody that really never works on it and tell the vendor, just go do it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you probably experienced that. Well, if you think about what this you just described and what this is, it requires two things. It requires somebody with a deep understanding of the process, and it requires somebody that has the skill sets, you might say, to work with generative AI.
Mm-hmm.
And I described to you the fact that it's not very easy. It's very painful because I don't want to call generative AI a bad thing, but it's this person that doesn't listen very well and does whatever it wants. And sometimes it does things really well, but quite often it doesn't.
Sorry to interrupt you, Rick. You might like this. Jennifer and I both call it a extremely confident, well, it used to be a high schooler. Now we call it a college student but an overconfident college student that never admits they're wrong and always has an answer, even if it's not the right answer.
Well, maybe we need to go back to the World War II, if any of them are left, master sergeants.
That's right.
They can just yell at it and, get in line. I don't know. We're too polite, probably. But, but I think, you wanted me to talk about culture,
Yeah,
what
you were
works.
saying that companies have to and to get it right, you need real process understanding, you need to know how to work with generative AI. And then
Yes.
yeah, I think you were leading to and what does that equal in terms of companies that can and can't make this transformation?
Well, that's not how a lot of companies work today. They want to buy software and have somebody implement it and then go turn it on.
Mm-hmm.
And what I recommend to companies, and I have to some big ones, is, I think it's a 4-level strategy for, getting AI. First of all, you have to make it available to everyone so they can use it. Now, a lot of companies brag about the point that, well, first of all, most companies will not allow you to use uh, ChatGPT or something like that within the company about its data. I mean, the lawyers won't allow it. So that means you have to have your own models, and Microsoft and others provide those, but it costs some money, a lot more money actually per user. And then once they get it, they turn around and say, but it's pretty expensive, so most people aren't allowed to use it. I mean, it's like, I don't know, somebody got it, but then some financial guy says, don't do it. But in any case, everybody needs to get comfortable with it somehow, preferably around the company's data. Secondly, you actually do need very successful pilots. And again, back to Art Systems, I think it's a place where if you invested in it, you could actually get a rate of return that you could talk about, and everybody would be really excited. Because especially in the factory, and having been a manufacturing engineer at one of the biggest companies, everybody's coming to you. Actually, at this event, I was uh, the last week. I was at an event down at the new Ford, whatever train station thing. It was beautiful. The Center for Automotive Research Management thing, or about 150 people. The governor spoke and whatever. Well, for one of the big OEMs, I got a hold of the head of manufacturing. He spoke, and actually, I mentioned Art Systems to him, and he listened. But what I realized, what he said to me was, he said, I probably have 300 or 400 companies every day try to contact me and tell me this is the best thing since sliced bread. So if you go from his perspective, um, he can't sort out what's real and what's whatever. So I think as companies, you need to go through a process of figuring out where you're going to make your bet. You need to then, because manufacturing people, if you let them down once, you probably don't get a second chance. Uh, you need, I mean, maybe for a whole type of thing. And in my past experiences, I've let a few people down, and I know they won't take your calls after you do. And I think in the generative AI space, you need to get some huge wins. So you get the people that really control the work, the more senior plant people, to say, I can, this will affect me because my plant will perform better, and it'll be easier for me. And you have to get that into their heads. And once that happens, and I don't think it's happened yet, then they'll want more and more of it. They build on success. And so I think from a cultural perspective, I just point out that in generative AI, down in the companies, you need to get that big win that says to them, this is real, this can make a difference. And then they will get very aggressive. They'll probably come to me now that I'm on your podcast and say, Rick, I want to see your 4.5 million opportunities and sort through them.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And, unfortunately, I left them all at Infosys, so they'll have to, for confidentiality, but I could probably recreate them. And but in any case, I think that's what has to happen, and I have not seen that happen yet much in from a cultural perspective. If I could digress, you would ask me a question that I get off on tangents. I'm old. Um, you would ask me about digital twins, and I was very involved with
Well
digital
back. Yeah,
twins.
yeah.
And the early ones, Dassault was one of the leaders. Siemens is certainly very good too, and others, but those would be probably the two main players.
Yeah, agreed.
Um, Early on, we used to have Honda come in and speak, because they probably had the most advanced digital twin. This is probably 4 or 5 years ago. But what they did was they only did their digital twin of what mattered. They didn't, where's this, where's the machines, whatever. The Japanese tend to be very process oriented. They think about no waste, no getting the color of the glass right up on the roof, getting the XY location of where the pillar is important. But then it started to expand, and certainly with NVIDIA entering the fray, and I was at their conference uh, 2 years ago when Siemens rolled out the complete digital twin of a ship.
Mm.
And so what's the advantage in that? Probably pretty expensive to do. You could look at the ship and look inside of it and, review it really before it was built. And what NVIDIA did was put in Pixar graphics into the digital twin capability, which went from more like a CAD drawing to more like a show or a cartoon or something. But it actually looks very real. And I had never, I'd been pushing them for a long time, but about 6, 8 months ago, I got the real stuff, the looked like an astronaut with a backpack, and I
Right,
went down inside a plant and I'd been selling it, but I'd never really experienced it.
Mm.
And after I experienced it, I realize whether it's from Meta or whatever, this is a whole new thing.
Yeah.
It's,
It's
I
powerful.
mean, you can look inside of machines and see what's going on inside. But in any case, that's going to make a big difference. But that can't happen without generative AI because the amount of data that has to be pulled in and managed and kept relatively current is way beyond what you could do, XY connections with. And then what I wanted to also mention, I talk to a lot of customers still, and what they all dream about is having the specifications, maybe even created, but ultimately from the customer, if you're a supplier, analyzed by generative AI.
Mm-hmm.
And then looking at the history of every CAD model and everything they've ever made,
Mm.
get a first cut at what that would look like. Okay.
Mm.
And then some of this is even available. Then start modifying it because it won't be perfect. And then having the analysis immediately return with if I change, this to here, how will the analysis run?
Yes.
Clear down through testing and out into manufacturing. And if that really comes to fruition, which I think it probably will, everybody wants it, they're moving that way, and it really changes how we develop things. I mentioned the change in the process. Today we do it what they call water flow. And I know more about seats than anything, but we go through and we do some analysis along the way. And I used to have 150 analysis people direct and around the world. So a lot of analysis experience, but it took a while to do it. So when the engineers are working away and the analysis comes back a couple weeks later, they say, that's interesting, but we've moved on.
Yeah.
But then when you get to the sled test, which we had to certify the seats, and you run the dummy and it doesn't work, and it never really worked in seating because the specification for seat has to look perfect, work perfect, fully functional, has to weigh zero and cost zero, and everything else is a trade-off. And so you work right at the edge. Well, then about half of your simulation budget is spent to just patch it and try to get it to work. And then the manufacturing, it goes out in the manufacturing. Now, at very late, they know what it is, and probably the tooling isn't quite right, and it's a big mess.
Mm-hmm.
Well, software is totally different, and I do software. You write one line of software, and if you're good, you totally test it against everything else and say, that's a good line. Now let's go to the next. Tesla was the first really to take that concept of how you design something and put more, and I don't think they totally succeeded, but certainly made a big jump in the concept of everything you do immediately analyze.
Mm-hmm.
And that ultimately will allow you to go
Test-driven
from this
development.
waterfall to a much whatever. And why that matters is then you just get much better products. People want that clear down into manufacturing so that you lay out everything, you have the digital twin end to end, and then as you're designing it, everything's morphing.
Yep.
And that might be out a while, but I bet you within 10 years that will be actionable. And all through that process, now that's the creation.
Well, the two
Now,
sides of this world, you describe the amazing, Meta VR or whichever company's building it. My wife's at Meta, so we get these just all over the house headsets and everything like that, and they're truly amazing when you use them. But there's that world, which is like pulling us into the metaverse, and it's totally amazing from a UI perspective, and then
Mhm.
you're embedded in it. And then there's the opposite side, which is you're kind of talking about that test-driven development where you change one thing about the manufacturing line and then that's like a what if. A lot of our customers these days, I think they like to say this as a what if, like what
Mhm.
if the product specification is a little different, what if I add another test step, what if I automated this instead of had it as manual, what
Right.
happens to the factory line, can I immediately get feedback of if that makes sense or not. And then
Hmm.
these two modalities are super important and we see them coming together, but they're kind of far apart because there's this just like amazing immersive UI, and then there's this like step by step test driven development. And so I think that full merging is still a good amount away. And the reason it's kind of far away is because both are getting better so fast. But on this side of the world, if you follow me, like one of the like the UI is nothing like a put on glasses and I'm seeing the line transform before my eyes. But what you can do with the real data is you can quickly just ask generative AI and you can work with these simulation tools to build me a what if. And you can
Hmm.
say, what if this test wasn't here? What if there were two tests? Or what if I had extra buffer capacity? And you can get, feedback against the real data. And so I think what I've seen is companies leverage the amazing immersive VR to do trainings that are really hard to see because that's something that if I've just seen it, like I know what to do inside the machine. And on this side, ask what if questions directly against your data, one click, two clicks away from your data, and then not miss those like super valuable use cases as you bring these two sides together. I don't know if that resonates with you, but that's
Oh no, I think it does. It's two worlds progressing that are gonna probably not crash, but we grow together, as you said. And it's just the reason I'm still active. I'm old enough to be retired. Actually, I'm retired from a couple companies. But this is the most exciting thing that's ever happened to mankind. A lot of people say, okay, is generative AI, what's the biggest thing that happened? Is it the creation of fire? Is it creation of penicillin? Is it generative AI? And of course, those all are progressive, electricity certainly. But this is sort of the next level
it's on
of,
par, right? At least.
yeah, well, it's probably progressive.
Yeah.
And
You think it's greater? You think it's like
well, the impact will be greater, and the
yeah,
speed will actually be greater.
yeah.
And the speed of it, and the reason to connect, a lot of companies try to do this on their own. Okay, and I think they should, except they should have several, depending in different areas, really strong partners that are feeding them. Because in my days at Infosys, I would take them, literally. I mean, literally, it was all coming in from all these directions, different, partners, companies, and I would get that very quickly in the reviews or meetings or whatever. And I think it was either on a 30-day or maybe a 60-day cycle. Whatever I was telling people, I had to massively adjust for the next 60 days
Mm-hmm.
because it's moving that fast.
Yeah.
And so you need a partner, you need a vendor, you need somebody that's going to stay on the leading edge and keep you there. And because otherwise I mean, you have some advantage, but you'll fall behind, and that's pretty exciting. I'm sure it'll stabilize. In the end, it's just a tool. It's just taking all knowledge and using statistics to make it available for everything. But yeah, I used to tell people during, I think this is my fourth transition to go through, I was, I really was one of the pushers to say, take your IT to the cloud
Mm.
and huge pushback from it. And, I always get in front of stuff and pay the price of the early adopter or whatever. I think there's somebody earlier than that. Well, this one, it's more powerful than the other stuff. And
Yeah.
again, the return. But I think having a partner that can stay with you, keep you current, certainly try important things. All of that is what companies, they all talk like they're doing it, but I don't think the budgeting is really there yet to
Budget
actually
doesn't
do
follow.
it. And It's frustrating, but it's always frustrating. But once all the board of directors, one of them does it well, and I have been around boards, then maybe two of them get it well, and they'll go, well, why aren't you doing that? And the CEO, you're a CEO, they'll start to think, well, okay, I want to keep my job. I better do that. And they'll make the money available. And I learned something along the way. And if you're like, in my case, for many years at Johnson Controls, across huge budgets, I had to go get the money to actually invest,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be product development or down in the manufacturing in some cases. And the finance guys would always start out by telling me no,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what they do. And and then they harden the business case. And Rick, you said you're gonna, 100 people less, but show me how you're going to get rid of the people. No, they'll just have more work to do, and we forget that. And so they want hard savings. And it's a battle, and you have to keep your credibility and whatever. But in the end, what I realized was, if they're hard savings, you can prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt, at least as much as that's possible.
I want to double tap right on that. It's perfect timing. When you said a few minutes ago that you feel like this is, on par with being one of the most impactful technologies in many, many generations. I couldn't agree more. I want to believe that. Of course, we believe that because we are building it, right? But I completely understand why that's hard to believe for others. I mean, I laugh as I I was in the car with my kids, last week, and somebody was pulled up a video and showed something. It's hard to believe, and they go, "Oh, it's got to be AI." Like, we're now in a place where we're synonymous with, like, it's fake is AI. Like, that's so you understand why when you talked to, the CEO, and he's like, "I'm getting a couple of hundred of these a day." How could they possibly sort through and understand what's real, where to make it real? Because the goal, like we said, is to get it out of pilot, to get it to scale. And we know that right now, in the age of early generative AI, it's really, really easy to prototype. It's what's harder is because it's fun, right? It's a little harder to take that knowledge and actually apply it to, like, where are the outcomes? And like you said, make sure that you're actually going to that step of it so that you can present that to a CFO and say, this is real. This is something that can scale. So I want to tap in on that for a minute with you. If your goal right now is to advise manufacturers on where they can see real traction so that we can move things out of pilots and get things into scale. That is the next frontier for AI, is to understand where it is and bring it to scale. So where are some of the workflows that you are seeing are ready? What's your playbook that you're advising on turning things out, getting it out of pilot and getting it into scale?
Well, that's exactly what I'm doing. And what I decided to do was find a handful of companies that I validated. I don't have that many yet, but I actually think they can make a difference in the ROI, to be noticed versus, you got rid of one HR person. I would rather see your factory being 10% more productive. And, and I don't have them yet. I've told you this, Andrew. I'd like to go in and say, here's my portfolio of people I think you ought to talk to. And I don't know that I'll make any money at it, but it's really fun to have those discussions. And I'm at this stage of a career where I just want to keep my contacts, and, I get taken care of in different ways. Might be dinner. It's good enough for me. So, but in any case, to go to your answer, where's the processes? I think certainly everybody knows up in the SG&A processes, there's opportunity. Not that technical, just automating things. And early on, like 3-4 years ago, we were doing HR systems and different things. And actually, it's hard. It's harder than you would think. We made a lot of money where people started out and did it themselves, but then it wasn't good enough to bring to production. And then we would go in and probably for 50 to 70 grand, typically take some small thing. Like one of them was to answer the questions from the street, in other words, what did they say during their
Yeah.
quarterly review? Can we do that? Little things just to get experience. And we did them, but it takes some fixing. Well, at this point, and I hate to put it this way, I think and you call yourself a smart startup, Andrew, but you're bigger than a startup. I mean, you have good whatever, you sort of validated
Yeah,
in the market.
about 100
Well,
people, 10 plus countries. So, yeah.
yeah. It's real. It makes a difference. It's measurable. So there's not that many of those out there, but finding some of those, and there's a lot out there, but they do something, but you can't measure it in ROI from the company. But ones that make a difference, I think you need to find those. And then I mentioned earlier the big vendors, whether they're Siemens, Dassault, SAP, et cetera. They generally on about a 3-year cycle to actually take concepts and get them through early and even get them out into the market even a little bit. However, historically, if you look at where the innovation comes from, it's generally not from the legacy vendors. The legacy vendors, and I don't want to do it here on this call, but I can go through 25 examples where things that we look at as key to a legacy vendor almost all came from a startup that put it into the market as Arch has, made it real, and then at a certain point in time, the big vendors have this massive scale across things, and a startup has here. At a certain point, it just made sense to put that all together, and that's sort of how the big companies grow, and that's how they do it. Well, I think in this case there'll be dozens, if not hundreds, of examples of things that are just optimized and then pulled in. And anyway, I didn't give you a full answer, but I gave you a how it's going to happen.
Yeah, I think it's like it's these workflows all around those legacy tools, and it feels so tempting as a customer to just be like, oh, my big legacy vendor will fix those, and it's not happening fast. And as you said, it historically has always been people that combine that process knowledge with how generative AI actually works, get it done, and find pieces that then click together. It's got to click together. So
I will give one example. So when I was back at Allied Signal, I said I got into early software stuff. I had the ultimate lights out plant, totally lights out. One of the first big ones had done. And IBM sort of noticed that it was a joint venture between, at the time, Accenture, or it was called, yeah, Accenture by then, maybe Anderson Consulting, uh, Bendix, as we were called, or Allied Signal, and IBM to create the ultimate system to run a plant floor. And I was the program manager. I'd work my way up. That's where I learned so many things. But as one of that, once it was all live, IBM came and said, we have early PLM system for aerospace, and we would really like to include that in the mix. And, after saying across all of Allied Signal, we needed free forever, and them telling me that was impossible, ultimately they bought in. And, we went through that, and it moved up the scale. Well, at the same time, that was the big company, making the push. A company called Matrix One really started out of Boston, coming up with what is now called PLM. And, it was really, I thought there were many little ones, but the creation, and when I was at Johnson Controls, I had this experience, and I actually spec'd out what it should be. It's called Engineering Central. And they didn't want to do it, but I said, well, how about this? I'll pay a huge amount of money for them at the time to do it, but you have to agree to productize it. And then you have to give me X amount of money back every time you sell it, which, I mean, they did it, right? And until Dassault bought them, which is now what Dassault PLM system is, we at Johnson Controls used to get a royalty check. Well, that's just an exact example of how the big company couldn't do it. The little company didn't even maybe had a different view, but a big customer got a hold of them that knew what they were doing. I guess maybe we culturally knew, but pretty well, and pushed them in a direction that they did what a big company would have never done, and then ultimately reset the whole market of what it was, and then it moved forward. And I think in PLM, there's really minimal ROI on PLM. I mean, it's an organization. You probably have to have it. Most people didn't used to have it. But with generative AI, it's so much more opportunity. For example, if you take PLM today, my engineers, which were 5,000 of them or something, they hate PLM. They just want to create their CAD drawings. They don't want to put all that extra metadata in. PLM was developed like a finance thing, debits and credits.
yeah,
Engineering is drawing things. Worlds don't mix. Well, as an example, the first system that really has good, and hopefully it'll be one of the big vendors, but it might not be. It might be one of the new cloud players, comes up with the ability where as you do the CAD drawing, it'll just keep all the metadata live. That's a 50% productivity increase, probably at least 30% to the whole engineering process.
Mm.
And I'm just giving you an example of where things can happen in engineering. Down in manufacturing, it's even greater. If you try to capture, which I have, all the manufacturing data for quality, for what's actually happened on the lines and so forth, whatever's up in engineering, it blows out 10 times. And most of it isn't, it's in spreadsheets and stuff. And to give you an idea of how poor it is today, I used to have a bunch of Six Sigma people, and on a typical big automotive project, there's about 300 spreadsheets running around pre-launch, down in the launch. And I had him go, and he figured out that only 50% of the data on those spreadsheets was accurate. But that's what they're running on. And, I think what must happen is when something goes bad, you iterate and fix it, and it's just this whirl.
Yep.
I mean, some of it's just because it's not current. And the concept of it won't be perfect with generative AI. That's the negative. Like I once was in the negative mode, I should say, of generative AI is always wrong. And I was with the head of R&D or whatever at research, actually, at Michigan State. And he said, Rick, you're absolutely wrong. Generative AI is always partially right, and generally much righter than you are.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
And that was, see, I can adjust, when somebody tells me a truism. Well, if you take my 50% spreadsheet problem, which probably is typical, and you get it up to, let's say, 70% right, that's a huge effect on the speed and probably the costs of doing something new.
Yep.
I'm just trying to make it real for
exactly, much less 95, and it doesn't ever get to 99.9, but it's a huge lift. All right, time for rapid fire questions, Rick. First one, is there a book, movie, or TV series that inspires you when thinking about the future of manufacturing?
Well, the one and the one from Toyota from many years ago, The Machine That Changed the World, I think is the best ever written, and it's still today the basis. Great. Now you can put over your head how would Gen AI help that, but that's what it's got to help.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. No disagreement. All right. Is there a leader or innovator you look to for inspiration? Someone who's shaped how you think about engineering or technology that particularly stands out?
Well, I know this is not politically good, but Musk is certainly the person that's affecting everything. I, at one point, told Dassault, because it was a very small customer for us and our chief people, you got to make him happy because he's challenging everything and everybody's going to follow. And it turned out to be true.
Yeah. Phenomenal. What piece of technology outside of manufacturing now has had the most impact on your life, and why?
Impact of technology outside of, well, obviously the computer. And I guess my whole career is built around making computers, do things that change the processes, et cetera, and digital. That's the only A I got in college. Electrical engineering was digital.
The only one you needed.
That's right. Okay, if you could instantly acquire a new skill or knowledge area, what would it be?
I at one point considered going into, gene splicing and, the human body and so forth. And I sort of regret that I didn't, to be honest, because that would be a whole nother future. And God knows where that's going to go. Probably makes what we're talking about here irrelevant.
we get some kindred souls, Rick. I relate to that one as well.
Amen.
Okay, in a few words, so, the audience that listens to this, Rick, we've got a lot of experienced professionals like yourself, other vendors like Arch, but also young folks who are getting into the industry. So in a few words, what advice would you give to the early career professionals who want to lead engineering transformations like you've done, but are starting out?
Well, certainly understanding how things work at the base level is important. And I've seen two paths happen where engineers or early engineers become more managers and sort of they become the mouthpieces. And that's important. And a lot of them become CEOs, actually, more than I did. But I've always been of the view that I've always tried to, as I manage, try to be like a university professor as a goal, where I can understand at a high level, I can coach, I can represent up. The hardest part is to represent up when you're an engineer, because we're never taught to do it effectively. But at the same time, really know what's going on. And here's the big thing. And I used to take actually very senior directors, and we're there with the CEO, and he's telling them, you're telling him I want this and this, and he's trying to explain why that's not really going to work and how hard it's going to be. And I say, you just got to look the CEO in the eye and say, I've got it. And if all you do through your career is you look at the person above you and say, I've got it, and then you go out and figure out how to do what he wanted, even if he didn't know, your career will go very well.
That was a great answer. Rick, this was so awesome. Thank you for coming on the pod. It was a pleasure to have you on the show. We're going to have you again. We've just scratched the surface of your knowledge, but this was fantastic.